Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Utah's new Attorney General installed a gate on his private land, he didn't expect war, but the local HOA had other plans. What began as petty complaints spiraled into illegal raids, fake arrests, and a SWAT takedown no one saw coming. This is suburbia, like you've never seen. It was a crisp October morning when I finally had the new gates installed. I stood at the edge of my property, coffee in hand, watching the crew finish tightening the last bolts. The steel bars gleamed in the sun, simple, industrial, and unmistakably permanent. Not decorative, not cute, and, most importantly, not HOA approved. A large black and white sign was bolted front and center. Private property, state protected. Trespassing prohibited under Utah Code Section 76-6-206. It wasn't meant to be subtle. I didn't want subtle. I wanted a message that couldn't be misunderstood, especially by the neighborhood royal court over in Whisper Pines. They were about a mile and a half down the road, but their noses seemed to reach farther than that. My wife, Sarah, was watching from the porch. She looked like she was trying not to smile, but failing. "You know this is going to cause noise, right?" she asked, brushing a curl of gray hair from her face. "I count on it," I said. We'd had too many trespassers over the past few months. Dog walkers, joggers, the occasional teenager looking to cut through my trails. But lately, a different breed had started sniffing around. HOA goons and golf carts. Whisper Pines wasn't just your average homeowners association. It was a lifestyle cult with manicured hedges and Stepford rules. My land wasn't part of it. Never had been, never would be. It was grandfathered private, deeded before the community even existed. But that didn't stop them from acting like I was squatting on their lawn. They hated the fact that someone like me, someone they hadn't approved, measured, or manicured, lived outside their jurisdiction. Worse, I wasn't just some hermit in a cabin. I was Utah's newly appointed Attorney General, and I knew exactly how to read boundaries, legal and otherwise. By noon, the crew was gone and the gate clicked shut with the finality of a judge's gavel. The next morning, I got my first visit. I was trimming the edge of the trail near the front fence line when I heard the faint whir of an electric motor. I turned to see a white golf cart bobbing down the gravel like it owned the road. Inside were two familiar faces, Karen Vale, president of the Whisper Pines HOA, local queen of synthetic civility, and Troy Sutter, her bulldog, a former mall cop who had appointed himself Director of Community Discipline, or some such nonsense. Karen stepped out like she was inspecting a crime scene. "Gabriel," she said with the condescension of someone correcting a waiter's pronunciation, "these gates are extremely inappropriate for the aesthetic of the community." I looked at her. "They're not in the community." Troy leaned on the fence with all the subtlety of a battering ram. He was wearing one of his homemade HOA officer uniforms, navy blue with embroidered patches, and a tin badge that would have made a Halloween store blush. His belt had a radio, a flashlight, and what looked disturbingly like real handcuffs. Karen continued, undeterred, "You're setting a tone that affects all of us. Whisper Pines has certain standards, visual harmony, architectural integrity. Metal bars and government signage don't align with our culture." "I don't live in your culture," I said. "I live on private land." Karen gave a tight-lipped smile, the kind you give just before telling someone they're being evicted. "Still," she said, "we'll be filing a formal request. You'll be expected to bring the gate into visual compliance within 30 days. I almost laughed. "Expected by who?" "By the Whisper Pines Architectural Committee," Troy cut in. I didn't respond, just turned and walked back to the house. Let them think they'd won a round. Let them believe I was some stubborn retiree clinging to his property lines. What they didn't realize, or maybe just refused to believe, was that I wasn't the storybook grandpa in a rocking chair. I was the man who had put away mayors, DAs, even a federal judge. I had teeth, sharp ones, but I preferred to let people walk into the trap on their own. That evening, I checked the security footage. Both of them had approached the gate with phones out, taking photos and muttering about nuisance aesthetics. Karen had even tried to scan the property with a flashlight, muttering about possible non-compliant landscaping. By the next morning, it had escalated. An email blast went out to Whisper Pines residents. It was forwarded to me anonymously by a friend inside the HOA board, someone who still had a conscience. It read, "Community alert. A non-compliant property has installed aggressive fortifications directly adjacent to our northern perimeter. These gates may impact property values and contribute to a perception of unsafety in our peaceful community. The homeowner has not submitted a variance request nor offered any communication to the HOA board. They were trying to start a narrative, a whisper campaign, fittingly enough. I didn't reply. I didn't post. I didn't so much as blink, because the more rope you give a fool, the better the knot he'll hang himself with. The only thing I did that day was adjust the camera angles. Later that night, at about 2 a.m, a motion alert pinged my phone. I pulled up the live feed. 3 men in dark clothing were creeping along the tree line. Black tactical vests, utility belts, patches reading community enforcement. One had a flashlight, another had zip ties, and the third carried what looked like a stun gun. None of them wore body cams. They weren't there to talk. But I didn't move. I stayed inside, watched, recorded everything, because if they wanted to play cops and robbers, I was more than happy to let them try. By the end of that week, I started getting the feeling I was being watched. Not metaphorically, not in the Karen's probably peeking through her blinds again sense, but in a cold, methodical way. Something about the stillness around my property had changed. Birds would scatter faster. Distant cars paused longer at the turnoff. Twice, I heard the unmistakable hum of a drone overhead, too low and slow to be anything but local. It didn't take long to confirm it. Thursday night, around 11, I reviewed the recordings from the East Tree Line camera. There it was. A black quadcopter circling low over my property line with a GoPro-style camera mounted to its belly. It lingered above the greenhouse, then zipped off in the direction of Whisper Pines. The next day, I received a plain white envelope in the mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a printed message, all caps Times New Roman. You think you're above our community? Time to rethink. For your safety, consider moving while you still have options. I read it 3 times, then folded it neatly and slipped it into a file marked Idiots with God Complexes. Sarah was less calm about it. Gabe, they're escalating, she said, holding the letter with a trembling hand. This isn't just HOA posturing anymore. This feels personal. I nodded. That's exactly what I want. She stared at me like I was losing my mind. I need them to show their real face, I explained, to cross the right line, in the right way, on record. That's the only way to bring this to court and crush it publicly. Just don't let them take this too far, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The kids. I know, I cut her off gently. Trust me. Trust. They'll regret it long before it ever gets to that point. By Saturday, a new post appeared in the Whisper Pines community Facebook group, which, thanks to another anonymous friend, I had full access to. Karen had written a long, melodramatic tirade under the title, The Threat Beyond the Pines. She claimed I was endangering their children by stockpiling industrial equipment and suspicious surveillance tech. She described my land as unmaintained, uncivilized, and a source of concern for property values and resident well-being. My favorite line. He appears to be some kind of disgraced ex-military survivalist living off-grid, possibly armed, possibly unstable. We have reason to believe he is connected to anti-government groups. I almost choked on my coffee when I read that one. Less funny, though, was what came next. Screenshots from my own property. Zoomed-in shots of my backyard shed, my generator panel, even the kids' bikes under the awning. Those drone flyovers weren't just surveillance. They were reconnaissance. I made some calls that day. One to a buddy in the sheriff's office, another to a prosecutor I trusted from Salt Lake, and one to a quiet little team from the state DOJ's internal unit. They all said the same thing. Let them keep going. Let them document their own crimes and keep everything backed up. So I did. I added another external hard drive to my surveillance system and set everything to triple redundant cloud backup. Nothing would disappear without a trace. Meanwhile, the HOA started publishing what they called the Community Integrity Map, a glossy digital PDF posted online and mailed to every resident. And right there, in bold red shading, was my land, labeled as a zone of degradation. The map key used terms like non-compliant border, surveillance concern, and, I kid you not, threat adjacency index. They had drawn a little red icon of barbed wire and a tower right over where my workshop stood. Sarah was livid. I'd never seen her so red in the face. "I'm calling the sheriff. I'm calling a lawyer. I'm calling—" "No," I said calmly. "You're calling no one. Not yet." "But they're publishing lies, Gabe. They're turning the whole community against us." "That's the point. They're making it easier to prove defamation, targeting, and harassment. Every public post, every letter, every map, it's evidence." I wasn't guessing. I'd handled racketeering cases with fewer smoking guns than this. Still, to keep the pressure contained, I posted one thing of my own. A sign, right by the new gate. It read, "Not affiliated with Whisper Pines HOA. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted under state and federal law." The next morning, someone spray-painted over it. "Community first," in dripping red letters. It was getting sloppy now, and sloppy meant vulnerable. That same day, while reviewing footage from the western perimeter, I saw a silhouette pause near my motion light. A man, heavy build, shaved head, black tactical vest, pulled something out of his pocket. The screen glitched briefly, then cleared, and there it was. One of my tree-mounted cameras, gone, ripped clean off. He'd cut the power to that corner first. Amateurs! They were getting too bold, and that meant they were getting close to making the one mistake they couldn't come back from. And I was ready. I didn't sleep the next few nights, not because I was afraid. Fear and I divorced a long time ago, but because I was waiting, watching, counting how long it would take before the idiots in polyester tactical cosplay would make their next move. People like Karen always escalate. The moment they think they have an audience and a mission, they turn into zealots. And Whisper Pines had been whipped into a frenzy by her crusade. It happened sooner than even I predicted. It was just after 2 in the morning when my phone vibrated. Silent notification from the backyard camera. Motion detected. I sat up, grabbed the tablet from the nightstand, and pulled up the live feed. 3 figures in black were moving along the fence line, right where the tree camera had been ripped down days earlier. They wore matching dark uniforms, reflective community enforcement patches across their chests. Their faces were covered with those cheap neoprene masks you can buy in a gas station. One had a flashlight tucked under his arm, another clutched a pair of zip ties like a nervous rookie trying to look intimidating, and the third carried an honest-to-God stun gun like he had practiced brandishing it in the mirror. I recognized the middle one immediately by his wide stance and perpetual tough guy posture. Troy, the HOA's discount Rambo. They hopped the fence with all the grace of raccoons falling out of a tree. The landing made the nearest motion light flicker on, and the one with the flashlight cursed under his breath. That was when I noticed the belts they wore. Radios, cuffs, tactical pouches. Not toys. They were investing in a fantasy. I zoomed the camera in as Troy approached the outer shed, the one I kept mainly for firewood and tools. He whispered something to the others, then he reached for the latch. The door was locked, obviously, and he gave it a frustrated yank. Then another. Then, just to prove what a tough guy he was, he took out the stun gun and drove it into the wooden door. It cracked loudly, electricity barking through the air. The 2 others flinched. Troy grinned under the mask like he'd just conquered Carthage. "That'll scare him a bit," he said, loud enough for the mic to pick up. "He needs to learn who's in control out here." I couldn't help the smile spreading across my own face in the dark. "Oh, Troy, you have no idea who's in control." They lingered for a while longer, walking slow circles around the shed and peering into windows, occasionally muttering to each other about probable cause and community rights. Every step they took, every stupid word, recorded in high-definition audio and video from 3 different angles. Eventually, they slunk back into the trees and disappeared toward the Whisper Pines side of the hill. I waited until they were well gone before I exhaled. The next morning, over breakfast, Sarah noticed I was in a suspiciously good mood. "What's with the smirk?" she asked, pouring herself coffee. "Let's just say the HOA is performing their own sting operation," I said. "Unfortunately for them, they're both the sting and the operation." She stared at me for a moment. "I hate that you're enjoying this." "Just building a case," I replied. Brick by pathetic brick. Later that day, I sent a secure file packet, including the footage, timestamps, and a detailed report to a very specific inbox belonging to the county attorney's office, along with a short note. evidence of criminal trespassing, impersonation of law enforcement, attempted breaking and entering, suspects identifiable, continuing to observe to establish pattern of behavior, stand by. The response was quick, too quick for a civilian. Copy continued documentation. Do not engage until advised. They knew who I was. They knew what I was gathering. They also knew that once I pulled the trigger, I'd want a clean surgical takedown, one that didn't leave room for excuses, technicalities, or loopholes, which meant I needed more. One late-night trespass wasn't enough, not for what I had in mind. So I reinforced the cameras, added another motion sensor near the shed, and calibrated the perimeter alarms to ping only when large human-sized objects crossed the line. Let the community enforcement boys play soldier. All they were doing was tightening their own noose. Saturday morning started out almost idyllic. The sky was sharp and blue, the kind of color you only get in the mountains after a cold snap. I was out back by the fire pit, flipping pancakes on the cast iron skillet while my two grandsons chased each other around with foam swords. Sarah was reading on the porch, hot tea in hand, eyes calm for once. It was the first truly peaceful morning in weeks. It didn't last. The growl of off-road tires over gravel hit me before the engine came into view. I turned toward the main trail just as two matte black SUVs rolled to a stop at the edge of the clearing. Not police cruisers, not county vehicles, but something more absurd. Heavily modified HOA cars. Each one had a magnetic decal slapped on the side that read Whisper Pines Compliance Unit. Sarah looked up sharply. Is that them? I wiped my hands on a towel and set the skillet aside. Stay with the boys. Doors opened. Karen Vale stepped out of the lead SUV, dressed in some kind of linen pantsuit, like she was about to host a real estate seminar. Troy Sutter followed, now wearing a full tactical vest emblazoned with HOA Enforcement Commander across the chest. Behind them came two more clowns in matching gear, all sunglasses and puffed chests. Karen was holding a folder. Troy had handcuffs dangling from one hand. They walked straight up to the edge of my yard like they were about to issue a press statement. Gabriel Stone. Karen's voice rang out loud and performative. You are under arrest for multiple violations of Whisper Pines Community Code, Section 3, Article 4, and Subsection 9, including obstruction of inspection, unauthorized structural additions, and failure to comply with HOA directives. I just stood there. The boys had stopped running. They were clutching Sarah's legs now, confused and a little scared. I caught her gaze. She looked like she wanted to throw something at Karen's face. Troy stepped forward, raising the cuffs theatrically. You're coming with us. I held up a hand. Before you embarrass yourselves any further, are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Right here? In front of my family? On camera? Troy didn't flinch. You don't have jurisdiction here. We do. I looked him in the eye for a moment longer, then turned and held out my wrists. Then by all means, Commander, enforce away. They didn't even read me fake rights. Troy just snapped the cuffs on like he was playing dress-up with his nephews, then nudged me toward the SUV. I didn't resist. Why would I? Everything was recording. Multiple angles, audio, time-stamped, synced to cloud storage in 3 separate states. As they marched me across the gravel like some HOA Hannibal Lecter, I saw Karen pull out her phone and start filming. This is how we handle rogue violators in Whisper Pines, she said smugly. You think you can undermine the community? Think again. Sarah shouted something. I think it was my full name, the one she only used when she was pissed, but I just gave her a slight nod. They shoved me into the back of the SUV. No cage, no barrier, just the faint smell of pine air freshener and tyrant desperation. The door slammed shut behind me. For a second, everything went quiet. I looked out the window at my house, my family frozen in place, and allowed myself one long breath. They had done it. The HOA had just abducted the state's top law enforcement officer under fake charges on private land. They thought this was a power play. It was a confession. The vehicle rolled forward, heading not toward a police station or county building, but down the road toward Whisper Pines' faux administrative center, a glorified community clubhouse they had retrofitted with cubicles and a sad little holding room with frosted glass windows and an American flag duct taped to the wall. That's where they were taking me, and that was exactly where I wanted to go. They marched me into the HOA clubhouse like they'd just captured El Chapo. The building itself was a joke. A repurposed events center with plastic potted plants and motivational posters still hanging from some forgotten wellness day last spring. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like they wanted to confess something. The air smelled like old printer toner and cheap hand sanitizer. They called this their compliance office. I called it set dressing for delusions of grandeur. Troy shoved me into a metal folding chair in a room no larger than my laundry room. There were 2 cameras mounted in opposite corners. I knew they didn't work. I'd seen their power lines dangling loose outside the building days ago. Theater, all of it. Karen strutted in behind him, holding her manila folder like it contained state secrets. "You can make this easier on yourself," she said, flipping open the file and pretending to read. "You've repeatedly violated our codes, ignored notices, defaced approved signage, hosted unauthorized family gatherings without community clearance." I raised an eyebrow. "You arrest people for pancakes and grandchildren now?" Karen ignored me. She pulled out a cheap digital recorder, set it on the table with the drama of an FBI sting, and pressed record. "State your name for the record." I looked at the recorder, then at her. "I'd like to invoke my right to—" "Oh wait, this isn't a real courtroom. You're just crazy." Troy crossed his arms behind me. I could hear him breathing through his nose like a gorilla about to challenge a zoo visitor. The 2 other officers stood outside the door, trying to look intimidating through a sheet of frosted glass. Karen leaned in, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're going to comply, Mr. Stone. You're going to remove those gates, clean up your yard, and you're going to stop threatening our community with your surveillance. Or this doesn't end here. You're lucky we haven't involved the sheriff." I chuckled. Couldn't help it. "Oh, Karen, I am the sheriff's problem. Or more accurately, you are." She blinked, and then came the bang. A single shattering crash that echoed through the whole building like a battering ram had kissed the front door, followed by boots, shouting, a voice barking, "Down! Down! Hands where I can see them!" The room exploded into chaos. The door behind me slammed open as 2 SWAT operators stormed in, rifles raised, helmets low. Troy reached for his little radio. Rookie mistake, and got shoved face first into the whiteboard behind him. Karen shrieked and backed into the filing cabinet. I sat calmly as one of the SWAT officers moved to me, saw the cuffs on my wrists, and muttered, "Jesus Christ," before unlocking them and pulling me to my feet. I dusted off my sleeves, turned to Karen, and adjusted my jacket. "Karen Vale," I said, loud and clear. "You are under arrest for false imprisonment, impersonating law enforcement, and operating an unauthorized detainment facility. You have the right to remain silent. Please, for once in your life, use it." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish trying to breathe air. She looked at Troy, who was now handcuffed and being dragged past the broken door, eyes wide with confused rage. You set us up," she whispered. I smiled. "I let you be yourselves." More agents poured in. Sheriff's deputies, 2 assistant district attorneys, and my favorite, Agent Morales from the Salt Lake FBI field office. He gave me a nod. "Clean operation," he said. "Got everything on live feed from the van. The entry team's body cams caught the rest. Don't forget the security footage from my place," I added. "There's a great clip of Troy trying to tase a shed." Karen tried to step forward, but a deputy intercepted her and gently but firmly pushed her against the wall. She still didn't quite understand what was happening. That made it better. They read her rights this time, properly, officially, with the real badge and everything. The compliance office was quickly swarmed, officers bagging evidence, pulling hard drives, logging uniforms, even seizing their so-called enforcement equipment. I watched one of the techs lift a black vest with Velcro labels that read Patrol Commander. It looked like something ordered from a surplus store by someone who had too much time and not enough oversight. In a back room, they found a wall map with pins and notes, surveillance photos, resident files, a printed list of non-cooperative elements. My name was circled 3 times. Underneath it, someone had scrawled, "Possible insider?" That part actually made me laugh out loud. Back outside, reporters had started arriving. Word travels fast when the Attorney General gets kidnapped by the neighborhood HOA. One of the local news vans rolled up just in time to film Karen being loaded into the back of a patrol car, flanked by 2 real officers with real authority. She saw me and hissed through the window, "You think this is over?" I bent slightly and smiled through the glass. Karen, this hasn't even started yet. Back at my truck, Morales handed me a file folder thick with affidavits, evidence logs, and signed warrants. "You ready to press charges?" he asked. "Oh," I said, taking the folder. "I've been ready for weeks. I just wanted to make sure it was public." I drove home slow, not because I was tired, adrenaline was still humming in my blood, but because I wanted the full weight of it to settle. The gate stood tall when I returned, steel shining in the sun like armor. Sarah met me halfway down the driveway, the grandkids watching wide-eyed from the porch. "You okay?" she asked. "Better than okay," I said, wrapping an arm around her. They took the bait. The morning after the raid, the front page of the Salt Lake Tribune featured a photo of Karen Vale being led out of the Whisper Pines clubhouse in handcuffs, her mouth wide open mid-scream. The headline read, "HOA Tyranny, Attorney General Rescued in SWAT Operation, Charges Filed Against Whisper Pines Board." I kept the paper, not for ego, for evidence. What followed in the next 48 hours was a chain reaction I'd rarely seen. Outside of organized crime cases, warrants were executed at 3 properties: Karen's oversized, immaculately staged villa, Troy's house, which looked exactly like a prepper's bunker covered in fake stucco, and the Whisper Pines office, now cordoned off with crime scene tape and patrolled by real deputies instead of cosplay commandos. I was in the county evidence locker by 10 that morning, watching agents catalog everything they'd taken. From the clubhouse alone, they recovered a crate full of faux community enforcement badges made of polished aluminum, stamped with serial numbers that meant nothing. Boxes of HOA uniforms ordered from a defunct private prison supplier in Texas. 2 stun guns, one of which still had traces of residue from the wooden shed door. Multiple pairs of cuffs, some with engraved initials. Trophies maybe. Dozens of forms signed under duress by residents, most of whom had never officially joined the HOA, but were recorded as members by default. On top of that, they found a ledger, not digital but handwritten, as if Karen believed analog records were harder to trace. It listed names, parcel numbers, enforcement fees, and notes like resistant, possible legal risk, or may require intervention. The total collected in the last 4 years? Over $400,000. Most of it funneled into a community reserve fund that didn't exist on any official tax form. I flipped through one of the logs, recognizing several names, people I'd talked to at neighborhood barbecues over the years. One note in particular made me stop cold. "Widow, Lot 14. Husband died 2021. Still refuses code compliance. Consider fines or forced landscaping." Jesus Christ. These weren't just power-hungry paper pushers. They were predators. By noon, every major news network in the state was running the story. HOA Gone Rogue was trending on social media. Someone had clipped the video of Karen shouting, "You're not above the community," right before the SWAT team burst in, set it to dramatic orchestral music, and uploaded it to TikTok. It passed 2 million views in 6 hours. Back home, I installed another camera at the end of the driveway, not because I expected more trouble, but because I'd gotten comfortable with overkill. Sarah watched me from the porch. "They're still calling," she said, holding up her phone. "Reporters, lawyers, HOA members, people from other states asking if they can join your class action." I paused mid-drill. "Class action?" She nodded. "Some civil rights firm out of Denver is organizing one. Dozens of Whisper Pines residents already signed on. Turns out half of them were strong-armed into paying fines for infractions like the wrong mailbox color or non-conforming birdhouses." "Birdhouses," I muttered. "We live in hell." By that evening, I was sitting in the district attorney's war room. A full task force had been assembled: criminal prosecutors, civil litigation experts, and a few folks from the attorney general's office who couldn't stop smirking every time they looked in my direction. Morales from the FBI presented a short report. "We've confirmed systemic fraud, illegal surveillance, impersonation of law enforcement, misuse of community funds, and coercion. Potential RICO elements under review." Someone asked if we could expand charges to include tax evasion. Another mentioned elder abuse statutes, given how many of the victims were retirees. I leaned back and let the machine roll. It didn't need me anymore. It had momentum. All I had to do was supply the spark. Now the fire was burning on its own. Then came the real kicker. A deputy entered the room with a sealed evidence bag and handed it to Morales. Inside was a thumb drive, found in Troy's safe. It contained hours of footage from their own body cams. Yes, they'd been filming themselves during compliance patrols. One video showed Troy and another HOA goon entering an elderly man's backyard, demanding payment for unauthorized tomato plants. When the man refused, they threatened to tow his car. Another clip, even more damning, showed a staged inspection of a property that had no violations at all, but ended with a formal citation and a printed fine of $200. The homeowner had been out at work. When he came home, he found a boot on his car and a bill taped to his door. Karen's voice could be heard on the walkie. "Hit them fast and hard. They'll pay before they ask questions." It was enough to make a statue clench its fists. By the end of the day, Karen was hit with 9 criminal charges, including false imprisonment, criminal impersonation, fraud, theft by deception, unauthorized use of force, operating an unlicensed enforcement agency, conspiracy to intimidate, coercion, racketeering. Troy was facing similar charges, along with possession of illegal weapons. The rest of their little patrol unit, 5 members total, were arrested or placed under active investigation. Some were already flipping, spilling details about how the whole scheme worked, who knew what, who approved what. I watched the press conference from home that night. The district attorney stood behind a podium reading the charges, explaining the scope. Then he said, "What we witnessed was not just a neighborhood dispute. It was a private regime operating under the mask of community service. Mr. Stone, the victim of this conspiracy, acted not only lawfully, but courageously. His cooperation made this takedown possible." Sarah looked over from the couch. "Hero now, huh?" I shrugged. "I prefer the term overly patient landowner." She grinned. "You always did play the long game," and she was right. But the game wasn't over yet. The courtroom was standing room only on the first day of the preliminary hearing. By 8 in the morning, the hall outside the county courthouse was packed with reporters, residents, lawyers, and more than a few ex-members of Whisper Pines HOA holding handmade signs like HOA Police and "I want my money back." I'd testified in plenty of trials before. Corruption, embezzlement, even a few organized crime rings. But I'd never seen this kind of venom in the air. Not for cartel bosses or politicians. No, this crowd saved their full hatred for a suburban tyrant in a linen pantsuit. Karen Vale sat at the defense table in a beige prison jumpsuit that clashed horribly with her usual press perfection. Her hair, which once defied gravity, now hung limp and exposed a sharp line of gray roots. Her eyes darted between the judge, the cameras, and the gallery, as if scanning for someone, anyone, to rescue her. Troy Sutter sat to her right, hands folded like a sulking child. The rest of their so-called patrol unit had taken plea deals. Most were already in protective custody after receiving threats from angry HOA residents who realized just how deeply they'd been conned. The prosecution opened strong. Videos, financial ledgers, testimony from elderly residents who'd been bullied into paying monthly disciplinary contributions. A retired nurse described how Troy had blocked her driveway with his SUV because her rose bushes were overgrown by HOA standards. Another homeowner told the jury he was fined $200 for unsanctioned seasonal decor. A Thanksgiving wreath. The judge, a former prosecutor herself, didn't even try to mask her disgust. My turn came on day 3. I walked to the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore in under oath. Every camera turned toward me. I could feel the weight of it. Not nerves exactly, but gravity. I wasn't just testifying as the victim. I was the one who'd baited the trap, documented the crimes, and held the gate open for justice to storm through. The district attorney asked the opening question. "Mr. Stone, could you state your occupation for the record?" "I'm the Attorney General of the state of Utah." Karen flinched. Several jurors blinked. One of them actually mouthed, "Oh my God." "What made you engage with the HOA in this manner, rather than simply take legal action at the outset?" I leaned forward slightly because I've seen people like them before. They hide behind bylaws and neighborhood newsletters, but what they really run is a racket. They rely on fear, ignorance, and intimidation. The only way to shut it down properly was to let them show their true face. On camera, in public, with no room to weasel out. We went through everything. The fake arrest, the trespassing, the impersonation, the threats, the surveillance, the stolen funds. I kept it clean. No theatrics. Let the facts do the bleeding. The defense attorney tried to rattle me, claimed I provoked the incident by installing my gates, by ignoring letters, by escalating tensions. "Do you deny that you were confrontational toward the HOA from the beginning?" he asked. "I do deny that," I said calmly. "I was legal, I was precise, and I was outside their jurisdiction. They weren't enforcing order. They were enforcing obedience. There's a difference." It was hard to tell whether Karen looked more humiliated or enraged. She spent most of the session whispering furiously to her attorney, but every time the judge snapped her name, she froze like a child caught cheating on a spelling test. Troy tried to speak in his own defense on the fourth day. He cried. He said he thought he was protecting the neighborhood, that he didn't know it was illegal, and that Karen told him they had authority from the county. When asked whether he truly believed he had the right to arrest a state official on private property, he said, "I thought the HOA rules were above that." That line made the courtroom burst into laughter. The judge had to call for order twice. In the end, it wasn't even close. Karen Vale was found guilty on all counts: false imprisonment, criminal impersonation, racketeering, conspiracy, wire fraud, coercion, and operating an unlicensed private police force. Her sentence, 14 years in state prison with no eligibility for parole before serving 9. Troy got 7 years with the possibility of early release, not because of his crocodile tears, but because he gave up everything. Emails, documents, texts, even a recording of a board meeting where Karen allegedly said, "If they won't follow our rules, we make them. We're the law here." The rest of the board were barred from holding any leadership positions in any registered HOA in the country. Ever. Several were hit with civil penalties and liens on their property. The fake patrol cars were auctioned. Their office was seized. The assets of the Whisper Pines HOA were frozen and then redistributed under court supervision. The state mandated full restitution to victims, over $2.3 million in total damages. A court-appointed receiver was placed over the HOA to dismantle it. The land they'd bought illegally for their enforcement outpost, my personal favorite name, was sold to a local charity. The clubhouse was stripped of its HOA branding and turned into a neutral community center under county oversight. But the real moment, the moment that stuck with me, came weeks later as I stood at the edge of my property watching a county crew remove the last remnants of the Whisper Pines fence line. Sarah came up beside me, sipping a coffee. "So, do we get a refund for all the years of irritation?" she asked. I smiled, watching the last segment of the sign that read, "Welcome to Whisper Pines, a private community of harmony," fall into a truck bed. "No," I said. "We get peace. That's enough." 6 months later, the land was quiet again. The air up in the mountains had that clean, pine-bitten sharpness I'd missed during the chaos. Snow had dusted the tops of the trees early this year, and a fresh layer covered the gravel road that led to my gate. Still standing, still steel, still untouched. Only now it bore a new sign. Clean, simple, black on silver. This is not HOA property. This is the territory of law. People slowed down to take pictures of it. Some even parked just to ask if it was real. A few thanked me. A couple cried. Turned out I wasn't the only one who'd fought a monster hiding behind freshly cut lawns and laminated newsletters. The Whisper Pines HOA no longer existed. Its board was disbanded. Its funds gone. Its former president now mopping prison hallways in Draper Correctional. But the impact didn't end there. Utah passed a new law, the Community Oversight and Enforcement Transparency Act, that stripped HOAs of quasi-policing powers and required public audits of all funds collected through fines. It was the first reform bill I personally endorsed as Attorney General, and it passed with near unanimous support. I also launched a nonprofit, the Sovereign Owners Legal Defense Foundation. We help people fight back against overreaching HOAs, offering legal representation, media coverage, and most importantly, knowledge. Our inbox flooded the day we launched. It still does. Sarah and I have our quiet mornings again. Pancakes, grandkids, the occasional deer wandering past the yard. No patrol cars, no clipboard tyrants, just home, as it was always meant to be. And Karen, she became a meme. Her mugshot, wide-eyed, mouth open mid-protest, ended up plastered across the internet with captions like, "When you arrest the Attorney General over fence height," and "HOA Karen versus the law." Someone even made a ringtone out of her yelling, "You're not above the community." I downloaded it for old time's sake.